want to assure you that it is a true coincidence that on the weekend of Bastille Day we have the beheading of John the Baptist as our gospel. That was not a liturgical intention. That was not intended to happen that way. But it certainly makes for an interesting approach to understanding the Scripture, doesn't it? I find it interesting at times how various things attract my attention and then hold it for a time period. Things that perhaps before would not have done so or haven't done so for a long time. Recently, I became quite enamored with watching the World Cup. I haven't watched sports in a long time, other than to turn it on so it'll help me take a nap. But I really got involved in watching the World Cup, and I've really gotten involved in watching Wimbledon. And both of those, that comes as a surprise to me because these things have grabbed and held my attention. And I'm going to go watch the World Cup today. And probably Wimbledon, back and forth. But there's been another thing that has grabbed my attention during this time period, and it actually has grabbed it with more strength and attraction than any of the others. And it's a story that began on June the 23rd in Thailand, when 12 young boys and their soccer coach, as something of a reward, wandered into a cave. And folks didn't know where they were until they found their bicycles and stuff outside the cave, and they began to put together what had happened. And they had gone in, and there had been monsoon rains that came through, and it flooded. And they could not get out. They sat in the darkness of that cave. If you've ever been caving, spelunking, you know what that can be like if you turn off your lights and you're far enough back in. The darkness that was there, and I find it really interesting that the soccer coach had been in his younger life a Buddhist monk, and he taught them to be able to live through this time by meditating. But I'll be honest with you, I really didn't get hooked by this story until they found them. And then I went back and began to understand what had happened, and they began to paint the picture of what had happened with these boys. And that first video that they show, where they shine the light in and they say hello, and here are these 13 people there, is really quite a moving experience just to see this thing. How wonderful and how captivating it is. And then over the next days, to paint the picture, this wonderful picture of the rescue. If you've been spelunking, you know what that can be like. If you've been scuba diving, you know what that can be like. Putting them together is another thing altogether. So these folks who found their way in there did so at great risk, but they were determined to be able to find these people. And then they started bringing them out. They brought a few out, and then that was it. And I'm excited that these have come, and I'm so scared about what's going to happen with the rest of them. Can they be as successful? And then it starts. And I know the dangers. I know what is happening. And I know that they're under pressure because they know the monsoons will start again soon. But they persist. And then when they bring the last ones out, the incredible relief and joy on the faces of the family and friends that were waiting there for them. Oh, how wonderful that is. But everyone who went in there to bring them out took a risk. And one person who took that risk died. But he gave his life, believing that his work was important to go in there and rescue those people. Life is filled with risks. Some of them aren't that great. Some of them are small. Some of them are huge. Some of them literally involve our lives. Yet we face them every day as we go wherever we go to do the various things we do. We may try to minimize them, but they're still there. They're part of our lives. They're part of our faith. The risks taken by people throughout the history of our faith, the risk of John the Baptizer. We first hear about John when he has this leap within his mother at the presence of the unborn Christ. And then we encounter him as he's baptizing people who are coming to him, and as he is preaching the coming of Christ into the world, the coming of Jesus, and how the coming of this kingdom with this person is going to change not only things, but people. And lo and behold, here comes Jesus down to be baptized by him, and God anoints this moment by saying, "This is my boy. Look at him. I'm proud of him." And then we hear how John was arrested. Arrested for saying the things he was saying, for preaching the things he was preaching, for doing the things he was doing. But Herod doesn't want to kill him. He doesn't want to kill him, but then he gets this deal. John the Baptizer took a huge, huge risk to say the things he did, to do the things he did, to baptize the people he baptized. And he paid that risk with his life. Risks are part of our faith. Yet I think that there are times that you and I have found ourselves living more a life of comfortable faith. Oh, there's a reason to seek comfort in our faith. There's every reason to seek comfort in our faith. But when that becomes its sole focus, then I think we've lost something. And I really wonder what would happen if you and I would recommit ourselves to a life of risky faith, willing to take risks on behalf of our love of God. I have a friend who likes to talk about different churches and denominations as being silos. And he talks about how that often we lock ourselves in each of our own silos. Now, I think often we may take risks within those silos, but they're safe risks. We just had, for those of you who don't know, we just had our general convention of the Episcopal Church. Happens every 3 years. We get together, a group of our representatives get together, and they decide on the budget for 3 years. And there's always something that draws controversy before we ever show up In 2003, many of us remember that the big controversial issue was whether we were going to ordain and consecrate a gay man, a gay priest who was in a committed relationship. That drew a lot of attention, both within General Convention and outside of General Convention. There's always something that does that, always something that kind of gets people going. Well, this year, one of the great proposals going into General Convention was, let's revise the prayer book. Those of us who, I came into the Episcopal Church in the fall of '79, which means I came in about a month after the prayer book was approved. But boy, was it still going on. It still is in some places. But this became a central aspect of what this General Convention was about. Now, last Sunday, most of the deputies to General Convention, the lay and clergy deputies and the House of Bishops, got on buses and journeyed down to one of the detention centers and had a service outside of it where people who had come in from Mexico had been captured and placed there. And they did a service out there, and you saw a little bit about that. But what got the attention and what got people's blood boiling was they're going to revise the prayer book. Now, let's be honest. Part of the reason that they're bringing this up is to work with language. Language is always evolving. And part of the focus was to make it more expansive. How can we talk about God in terms that are not simply masculine? And how do we incorporate our understanding of humanity in our understanding of Christ? It's fair. And quite frankly, I have an opinion on this, and that's fine, that's good. But that got the attention, not going down to the detention center. And I think that that reflects, for many of us, a safe approach to our faith, a place of comfort and peace. And that's all fine and good. But I think I need to find, and maybe you, I think we as a church, both Episcopal and Church Universal, need to find a way to live a risky faith. And to do that means we have to get out of our silos and do it. We've incorporated a blessing at the end of the service for this service that we've been doing now for a few weeks during this season. And it goes something like this. If you have been fed at this table, go to feed the hungry. Go. Go to feed the hungry. If you have been set free, go to set free the imprisoned. Notice it doesn't say anything about go to set free the wrongly accused. That sounds kind of risky to me. Will Campbell. Will was the only Caucasian at the organizing meeting of the Southern Christian Leadership Council. Was very active in civil rights struggle throughout the South. At one point, he was the Baptist campus. He was a campus minister at Ole Miss, and he wrote some very provocative books. I talked about one of his books quite a while back called Brother to a Dragonfly that was a National Book Award nominee. But Will was quite fond of looking at how the gospel challenges us, and he was not very popular among fundamentalists. And he lived outside of Mount Juliet, Tennessee. And he liked to tell the story of how people would drive up in his driveway, and he would be sitting on his porch, and they would come up and try to convert him. And one day, this fella came driving up, and he got out of his car, and Will knew he was in trouble because he had a leather-bound Bible in his hand. And he said, I could smell that it was the King James Version. I'm not sure he said that, but I think he ought to have. And he said as the fella came up, he sat down and he started on what was the typical spiel for these folks who would come to try to convert him to their way of believing and thinking. And the fellow started and he said, Brother Will, he said, I think that you and I need to take this book and we need to live it. And Will said, I looked at him and I said, thank God you've come here. Let me get my hat. And he said, well, why? Where are we going? He said, we're going down to the state prison and we're going to set free the prisoners. A very risky and provocative thing, I think. Maybe that's not where we're going with it. Maybe that's not the particular. But in some way, you and I the church has to reclaim this idea of living a risky faith. Oh, there's a lot invested in that. Surely there is. But I think it's part of who we are. John the Baptizer, he gave his life for what he knew he had to do. He has my heart. That man who put on his scuba equipment and went in there taking oxygen to those people and who on his way out drowned. He has my heart. I am inspired by both of them. And I suspect that if you and I live a risky faith in this world, we will inspire others with God's love. And oh, how wonderful this will be. Amen.